All right, welcome everybody. So this is the October 29th, 2020 meeting of the Government Ops Committee. And so we have on our agenda tonight 3 items: review of the Unified Government's policy for naming of public places in Athens, review of the transit advertising program, and then I think we're going to start off discussion, excuse me, of the stormwater management public and private agreement. So before we do that, I guess we need to approve the minutes. So I had one correction to the minutes. I think it's really just a typo. It's on page 2 under the transit advertising program. And there's the second sentence at present reads, Commissioner Harrod said he agreed with Commissioner Denson's recent proposal regarding increasing the proportion of our buses. I think it should be increasing the proportion of our buses that have advertising or something. So do any other committee members have any other corrections? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve with that correction.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. So the first item of business is to look at the policy on naming. And so we have 2 documents that relate to that. One which has come through the planning department, and one which has come, I think, from Kent. It's not a letterhead, but it says Central Services and Leisure Services. So, Josh, do you want to quickly lead off with that, or? I mean, I'm assuming everybody's read it. But.
Yep. So just as a follow-up from last meeting, the ask was for both Leisure Services and Planning to update their 2 drafts based on the feedback y'all gave, and then we send it out in advance. And so we could put both documents up on the screen if you want, and Brad and Kent can speak to theirs separately. If you guys have specific questions, we could start with that, and then we could go from there, but we think these are pretty close and want to just get y'all's feedback on what you saw. All right, so I know Kent couldn't get on the computer, so I'm going to put the Leisure Services document up here, and he can speak to that and answer any questions y'all have. So this might just be, so we're going to just have to kind of coordinate between him and I here as I throw this up.
Yeah, thank you, Josh, and I appreciate your patience with my internet issues here, and I'm having to be on telephone. But basically, just a quick recap. We discussed last month that the biggest concern regarding this policy was how do we prove broader community support. It was very nebulous, and we wanted to try to fine-tune that. And the other is how do we deal with naming over deceased individuals. So you'll see in this draft, and Josh, if you'll scroll down to the bottom of page 2 where it says process for submittal, that's where some of the additions begin to, the updates begin to this policy as a recommendation. I included these based on our discussion. We took a stab at what I thought I heard from each of you, and we can certainly make adjustments as we go along. But one thing we did seem to agree upon is that a petition would be a form of the written documentation we'd be requiring. I put in here that we would want to recommend above the age of 18, and of course get the address of each person. Then I took a stab at the numbers, and for large for buildings or for parks or for big open areas of land, I was recommending 300 signatures as a minimum. That seemed to be a landing point on several policies I researched around the country. But then if you look at smaller things like items within a park, if we were naming a playground or a splash pad or a gymnasium, then maybe only 100 signatures, a smaller number, we would be asking for. And there was also some discussion of this group about possibly having residents within a mile radius of the location that's being renamed. So I put in there a minimum of 51%. Then if you scroll down a little bit further, there seemed to be interest amongst the committee to require, in the top of page 3, a public notice. So we put in a 60-day period where we would be advertising the new name, giving those residents who have not had that opportunity for an input that chance to speak up at a commission meeting or in whatever form they may choose. So before moving to the deceased person topic, we can pause there if there's any questions or comments.
I had a question on that part, Kent. And it was mainly with the scheduling of the public notice. Or in this process, that the public notice would be going out twice before the mayor had determined what the next step would be. And to me, that just seemed a little, maybe not the best order, because then one of the things the mayor could decide to do would be to hold a public hearing. And I guess I would find it helpful, I would think, for a public notice, if in the public notice it had the date and if a public hearing was happening or not. Almost like that public notice part should happen after the decision of how this is moving forward should be. I don't know. That was my one concern.
Okay.
And I'll just tag on there a little bit too. So looking at page 3, the third bullet, it says at the end of the 60-day period, the director shall submit the qualifying name along with a summary of the public comments to the manager for consideration. And I'd be interested in hearing what Tim and Melissa think, whether that should go to the manager for consideration or whether it should go to the mayor and commission for consideration. I mean, given that it's ultimately the mayor and commission that's going to make the decision, I mean, if we think about the charter strictly, the manager fulfills the wishes of the mayor and commission, doesn't necessarily serve as a gatekeeper, or shouldn't necessarily serve as a gatekeeper there, I don't think.
I understand.
I agree,
Next bullet, Dan.
I mean, I think that, even in the form of just a memo, having that notice given to the commission as a memo initially. So, if there are any objections, concerns, whatever from the elected body, that can be addressed up front,
Okay.
I mean,
and that next bullet does say that the manager then consults with the mayor and it moves forward from there, but we could certainly make an adjustment, but generally we pass our information and reports on to the manager and then he deals with it from there.
Well, but also, I mean, the mayor is only one of 11 elected members of the mayor and commission. So I think it needs to, my own personal feeling is I think it needs to go to the mayor and commission sooner rather than later in the process. And I think it needs to go to the entire mayor and commission and not just the mayor.
I agree.
Okay.
So the question I have is, so it looks like what we would plan to do is write an agenda item to the full mayor and commission. Is what y'all are asking for a notification earlier in the process that this is coming, and that will, there's a agenda item coming basically. Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
I have a couple other things that I noticed. When we're talking about the amenities, the larger amenities versus smaller ones. You talk about 300 signatures for a park, building, or natural area. I think we should mention trail there. I'm sure that as our trail network gets established, there'll be like segments of trail that people are going to want to name after people. And to me, that seems like a very large amenity, especially being linear and touching on lots and lots of properties. So I think we should definitely add trail to that. And I have concerns about this 51% coming from within a 1 mile radius, especially when we have facilities that are, in areas that aren't all that populous, like Sandy Creek. Say somebody wants to name a beach or a pavilion or something or a trail after someone out at Sandy Creek Park. There's not a whole lot of residences around there. I think you might have trouble coming up with 151 people to sign that petition. So I kind of wonder if we should just make it a set number of people that live within that 1 mile radius. Even just 50 people in the 1 mile, or maybe extend the radius to 2 miles. It wouldn't, I don't think it'll be a problem at all in someplace like Bishop Park. But I think, even Hollins Park, it might be, that's a large facility and only surrounded by populated areas on a couple sides.
I mean, my own personal feeling is that it might, and this is making things a little bit more complicated, but, we have different levels of things that we might want to name. I mean, something like a park or a building is much more substantial on the kind of the county's landscape than maybe, naming part of a trail. And so maybe we want to have kind of like a sliding radius that the bigger the facility, the more people you have to have involved over a wider area to approve a name change. So, if we've got something like a park, that's going to, from an iconographical point of view, that's going to have a much greater impact upon, the broader county than maybe, I'm trying to think of a very small facility that might just be the focal point of a particular neighborhood or a couple of neighborhoods. I don't know, Tim or Melissa, I don't know what you'll think about that.
Yeah, I just think that these facilities are so varied and they're in, such varied locations that, a one size fits all kind of policy, I guess 2 size fits all, I don't think suits them. And that 51% of signers, that's 151 people if you're looking at 300. And I wonder if 151 people even live within a mile of Sandy Creek Park.
Well, for that part, I wonder, because that's a good point, Melissa, but I wonder if we could have it say a minimum of 51% of signers, 51% of signers must live within a 1 mile radius of the location, or 10% of those within that 1 mile radius, whichever is lower. Putting that little crux in there for the possibility that there are some areas that have very low population. So we say that a solid 10% of those people, living there, have to be on board.
That seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Why,
I think they can fix that problem.
This is Patrick. Why 10%?
I will be honest, I was just pulling that number kind of out of my head, that we can do a little bit more calculating on it. But 10% of a population is a pretty large percentage of a population. But yeah.
I think what Tim's saying is, say you only have 80 people who live within a mile of a facility. It's hard to get every. I think 10% is a. You may not. I don't see a large percentage of people being civically engaged enough in such a process in this kind of activity to get those 80 people, and you might have less than the required 151 people living within that 1 mile radius. But I think maybe setting it at a specific number rather than a percentage, like maybe 50 people total out of the 300.
Well, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm just kind of spitballing. Go ahead.
The opposite way of thinking about it, which gets us around issues of dense versus not very densely populated areas, is, I think we could have a tier where you need more people to sign for, let's say, a park or a building than for some other things. And then rather than giving a fixed number, you just give a fixed percentage. So I'm just pulling numbers out of the air, but maybe you have 30% for the park and 10% for other amenities within an area that gets bigger, the more important the thing that we're talking about is. Because I do think for something like a park, we don't have a lot of them. And, to my way of thinking, those naming opportunities should be reserved for really, truly exceptional contributions to the community that are, to a much more above and beyond than 100-yard stretch of a trail or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if to try to have that higher threshold, because I kind of agree. And also, I know we're piling on. So first off, Kent, I just want to say this is really good, and I think it is getting us really, really close there. I think this is why we're now like nailing down to these specifics. And I think one thing that I did like that was in the street naming policy was that it had to be endorsed by the current mayor and the commissioner representing the district it lied within. And I wonder if it's not a bad idea to put that same requirement on this. And that kind of helps deal with what Andy's bringing up about like the commission kind of knowing this is even going on and moving forward. It requires that commissioner to be brought in and somebody on that level is there. I think it also sets a little bit of a higher threshold and maybe puts the brakes on, I don't know, somebody trying to name a park after Baba Booey or something, commissioner says like, I'm not moving forward with that and it's kind of dead. So I wonder if that's something we could have put in there too.
I think we can. Certainly, I can certainly look at that. And as far as tiering, to the comment that was made there, Commissioner Harrod, this was intended to be a tiering. Maybe it's too broad. Do you see 3 levels, 4 levels? I'm trying to get an idea of just how in depth you want to go with tiering.
To be honest, Ken, I think that's a really good question, and I don't really have a very good answer for you, I'm afraid. Just my way of thinking, something like a building or a park is a bigger deal than 100-yard stretch of trail. I'm sure that there are some things that are, a bigger deal than a 100-yard stretch of trail, but not as big as a deal as a park or a building. I just can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm just not being very creative at the moment. But, you have a better, I guess you and Brad, have maybe a better idea of the kinds of things that we might be talking about. And maybe if you all could kind of put your thinking caps on and maybe think about, what might fit between building or park on the one hand and 100 yards of trail on the other. There's something in the middle. I don't know what it is. But I just, the more I think about it, maybe it's just because it's kind of what I'm pushing at the moment, but I do think it makes sense to have a tiered approach. And I think it makes sense to make it more difficult to name something that's a much more significant piece of infrastructure, like a park or a building. And so in that regards, maybe if we do it by percentage, we get around the numbers issue, which Melissa was bringing up, which I think, is an issue for some parts of the community more than others, where there aren't that many people living. So if you do it percentage-wise, you get around that issue. But I do think, we could maybe have a higher percentage of the people that live within a larger radius of the facility for something like a park than for something like 100 yards on a trail.
All right, that's reasonable. So what I'm hearing on this issue then is that we'll look at least 3 tiers, and there could be the potential for a 4th once I group some of these. We'll look at a lower percentage on some of these, but the percentage would scale also based on the tier, and then a little bit more incorporation of the commission up front when it comes to these recommendations. Is that what I'm hearing?
I would just include one last thing, which is going back to my comments at the beginning. with the public hearing, the public notice, kind of figuring that out where it's a little bit more clear and set. Because right now, I guess I see a lot of the way it's structured now is a lot of possible moving pieces. There's a lot of different ways that it could actually go. And I wonder if this doesn't make more sense for us just to have a public hearing built into it. And that public hearing could be the actual voting session or the agenda setting session. But having that just a structured part of this, that every time this happens, there is a hearing, and that hearing is mentioned in that public notice that goes out, rather than this kind of the mayor may decide on 3 different things to do. Just having, this is what happens at the next step.
So that would be after the mayor and commission's review.
That's what I'm understanding, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Then if Josh, if you don't mind scrolling down to the bottom of page 3, under the naming and renaming considerations, there's a new bullet there that I took a stab at 3 years. That seemed to be some of the feedback I received from the committee, but also what was consistent in a few other policies that I had read, that the deceased person would be for 3 years after they have been deceased before consideration. Just gives that chance for any issues that might be out there to be cleared. And that's certainly a number that can be discussed.
I think
Any comments?
Melissa?
I think that's reasonable. I think 3 years is reasonable.
I agree.
I agree.
All right. And I did add one statement there at the top of page 4 under the renaming. This would give us that opportunity to have an out if we ever name after a person, or even if it was just a general name that was not after an individual. I think we should always have something in the policy that gives us a way to step back and reconsider should conditions change.
Yes.
Any comments about that?
That's a good idea.
I agree. I think that makes sense. And the other thing I would add, this probably doesn't, well, it might apply to an individual, but we had talked about, if somebody gives a boatload of money for something, and then we later on find out that they did something, that doesn't meet up with community standards, then to make it very clear in the donation document that they don't get their money back.
Okay, I can make that point clear. All right, that's it for the changes. So I will work on that one section based on the feedback you guys gave me, and certainly bring that forward prior to the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for your input.
Brad, did you want to talk about the street landing?
I will, and we changed direction on this a little bit in terms of policy, and once I got looking at it, we don't deal in the planning department with policies a lot, but this seemed to be a really good fit to go into our subdivision section of the zoning ordinance. There is a item in the subdivision regulations already that lays out, some requirements for first-time names of streets. This seemed like a logical next section to go right behind it. That if you are requesting to change the name of an existing street, then those are the 8 items that largely taken from what Savannah currently has in place. But just as a reminder in general, what this would require, and the way it's set up would be that if somebody is coming in wanting to change the name of a street to name it after a family member or whatever, it requires a lot more skin in the game up front in terms of research, homework, approvals from other impacted property owners versus, what we've seen a few times, for the, best of reasons, but somebody just comes to you and says, we love, our family member and we want to name a street after, we don't even know which street, but just something. And so in this case, they'd have to identify the street, they'd have to bring in a petition to the planning department. I think last month it went to the manager, but this would come to the planning department. with not less than 75% of the owners abutting the street to be changed or considered for change, and then some homework that they would have to do. Ultimately, it would also require an endorsement by the current mayor and the current district commissioner in which the street's located. All that comes in as part of the application, and then we process it basically as a type 2 procedure, which is the same as a special use permit or a straight rezone, to where it would go to the planning commission. The letters would be sent out to property owners within 400 feet of the street right of way to be changed. And then it would ultimately come up through to you with a recommendation from the planning commission, like the other items do. So it puts it more in our shop, but it requires a lot more upfront work at the beginning.
All right, thanks, Brad. Tim or Melissa, do you have any questions or comments?
I think this makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I don't have any concerns. I don't think.
Yeah, I think this sets a pretty high bar that is what it should be, and it has enough enough requirements, like with the commissioner and the mayor already signing on to it. Yeah, I think this is. I'm happy where this is.
Patrick?
No, it looks good. When it came to street name, and I thought we had discussed that, like, if like AT&T has a building on the street, that they'll be included in that. Is that listed here as well?
It's not listed in here, but we generally always would, and we could add it as one of the criteria. But if and when, upon approval of the street name change, we would have a standard mailing, and we'd send it to the same people we do anytime we approve a new subdivision. While still on paper, we go ahead and send it to all the utilities, all of those organizations, to let them know there is a new development coming. We would send it to the same group.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think if we had a business like, that was on a street, they would, obviously they're a property, well, not necessarily a property owner, because I guess they could be renting, but someone like AT&T would, I'm sure, own their own building. So that would come under property owners. So I think that's how we would deal with that. The only thing I will say, and this is my OCC mind working overtime here, is that there are obviously some district lines that run down the middle of streets. And so for number 8, where it says an endorsement by the current mayor and the commissioner, you might want to change that, the mayor and the commissioner or commissioners representing that street. Because in many streets, you have one commissioner on one side of the street and another on the other. But with that small amendment, I'm not sure that we need the word the current mayor and the commissioner.
True. Good point.
You could just put the S in parentheses at the end of commissioner.
Yeah.
But just so it's clear for people that, 20 years from now, if this policy is still in place, that they look at it, they think, what on earth were they thinking? It's as clear as possible what we were thinking, why it says commissioner / commissioners representing that street or something.
That makes a lot of sense. I'll take care of that. And then just a reminder to you all with this type of an item, if you send it forward to the full mayor and commission, that vote will be directing it back to us to then prepare the actual text amendment for planning commission consideration. So this actually probably would not come back to you for a formal amendment to the ordinance until probably February.
Okay, so do we need a motion to send that to the full mayor and commission, directing them or requesting them rather to do what Brad just said?
Well, Andy, I have one more question, if I could, for
Brad.
Brad, so on the type 2 procedures, like you talked about, where the mailing goes out, I guess thinking through this, and I know it's a bit of a difficulty, but I'm thinking of tenants, especially residential tenants, also for business tenants, especially long-term ones that might, live there for many, many years, and this would affect them just as much, but they don't necessarily have a formal say in here. I get like they will be able to speak though at the hearing and be able to present their concerns still. But for when the mailings go out, do those mailings go out to the actual residences, or to the actual addresses on the right of way, or do they go to, if it's a property owner, they go to the property owner's mailing address kind of situation?
Generally, for zoning purposes, they go to the property owners as identified in the tax digest. HPC goes to owners and to occupants of the building. For zoning, it's generally just owners.
Would it be possible for us to do as the HPC does and say occupants and owners, so that we can make sure that we're actually getting tenants who would be drastically affected by having their address changed like that?
For purposes of the petition?
Not for the petition, because I think that would be difficult, but for the notification happening.
Yeah, I mean, that would be an amendment to a different section, and then that would be, because it's picking up just under type 2, I mean, that would change the mailing procedure for any type 2. So any rezones as well would modify it, which we can certainly look at it and clarify that language.
Okay. I think that would be helpful, but I think and this would be even more impactful on those tenants outside of maybe some other special use permits. It would not necessarily, but I could just see this happening where we change the street name, especially in an area that has a lot of rentals, and have the occupants not even knowing it's happening until it's very late in the process. And so I want us to make sure that we are avoiding that.
Let me take a look at it, because what I'm trying to avoid, honestly, a little bit, where I don't disagree with you at all on the issue like a street name change, but if we had a small special use permit that was within 400 feet of a 1,000-unit apartment complex, that's an extra 1,000 letters that have to be mailed for that rezone, which may certainly not be at the same level of impact that having your street name changed.
I agree. So I wonder if there's a way for us where that it says that, I don't know, if that shall follow the type 2 procedures that's set forth, except that also mailings would go to occupants as along with owners. I don't know, because I agree. I don't want this necessarily to change all of the type 2 procedures, but just very specifically for street name changes.
I can work on that. Yeah, I think we can make that happen, and I tend to agree with that.
I mean, Brad, I think it's particularly important if you have a street that does have some commercial property on it, where the commercial property may not be owned by the actual business, but that business may have been there for 20, 30 years, and they've got letterhead and business cards and websites and all kinds of stuff that they're all kinds of directories they're in. I think if anything, we should at least assure that notice goes out to commercial tenants.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Commissioner Denson and Link, because what I was thinking about with my AT&T example, bad analogy, but think about West Washington Street. Let's say we want to change it to Griffin Road or something, and we got businesses that are commercially established down there that people recognize, like West Washington Street Studios or Washington Street Bar. But if you change it to Griffin Road or something like that, the property owners may agree to change it, but it'd be I would say a detriment to the business owner who have named the street will name their business after the street that they've been on.
Yeah, I can look at that, because I mean the other piece of the whole puzzle is that the property owner that owned the property with the business on it may not have been one of the 75% that signed the petition in the first place. So I'll look at that, and when it comes back in amendment form, we'll have that modified.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brad, are you, I guess Brad and committee, are we wanting this to come back once more to us to see the final version, or Brad and or committee, are you looking for a recommendation from us to recommend your future amended text be sent to the mayor and commission with the request to send it back to the planning department?
From my standpoint, it certainly doesn't because this has kind of been running in tandem from a committee recommendation with Kent's naming, and it sounds like his is coming back one more time. I can certainly do that tweak and get it back with Kent's. I mean, we've got a gap in January anyway where we don't bring you items, which was part of the reason it was pushing till at least February. So I certainly don't mind doing that and come back and hanging out one more time.
That way we could include both of them in the same GOC
All
report.
go together. Yeah. That's fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tim, Melissa, and Patrick, you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks. Okay, so I think that wraps up naming. So then the next thing we have is our transit advertising program. And so what I had asked is for our attorney's office to give us some kind of a lay of the legal land in terms of First Amendment issues. So Sherry provided I thought, a very helpful memo. Sherry, do you want to maybe just kind of hit the high points?
Sure. Yeah. So the gist is that whenever we're talking about First Amendment issues and restrictions on freedom of speech, that we're really talking about is what kind of forum is there, whether that's a traditional public forum like courthouse steps or, being like at the Arch, places where public speech is always really common, whether it's on the opposite end, a designated public forum where it's not normally common, but by practice, we've set it up to be. So like that might be a public meeting space in a building where you could restrict speech normally, but you've said this is a designated area. And then right smack in the middle is a limited public forum, which is what our buses are typically right now, and what I would argue would prefer to keep them as, which is that yes, there can be some speech, but it has to be under specific guidelines, and there are restrictions that governments can impose. And that's just because you need to be able to conduct your business in a way that doesn't interfere with the public and the operations of that business. So in this case, we're talking about transit. We want people to be able to feel safe. We know that we have a captive audience, right, on the bus. Who may rely on it entirely for their transportation or may choose to ride the bus, but in either case, we want them to feel safe and comfortable while they're riding. And so that's why our policy has always been designed to make sure that we maintain that status as a limited forum so that we can maintain those restrictions for everyone's benefit. And so one of the main ways that you do that is making sure that it's really for commercial speech, which sort of feels a little bit odd, right? But nevertheless, that's what it is. So the purpose of it is to raise funds for transit, to kind of augment the business, to make sure that transit is able to continue to operate. But it's not to provide a forum for private public service announcements and things like that. And so I'm happy to answer some questions or talk about the policy in more detail, but that's sort of a high-level overview of why the policy is the way it is.
Melissa, Tim, or Patrick?
So basically what you're saying is we need to, like right now, there's the policy that you're not allowed to, we weren't allowed to have like family planning ads on the bus because that might be seen as offensive by some. So do we need to create a level of standards in some way?
Right. It's not that you can't have family planning because it's going to be considered to be offensive. I mean, because to some extent that is kind of the argument. The bigger point is that all your restrictions have to be viewpoint neutral. So when we say we're looking for commercial speech, that's a really broad category. We're not saying we're only allowing certain types of commercial speech. And once you start allowing things like family planning, then you're also going to get anti-abortion ads, and you're going to have the buses covered in pictures of fetuses. I mean, I can show you, I mean, not necessarily horrible images like what we see at Tate Student Center. I mean, there are some reasonable limits with regards to like obscenity. but that's exactly what's going to happen. And I can show you an example from another case. And it just happens all over the nation. So the moment you allow things like one city got in trouble because they allowed something about the Vietnam War. And so then they ended up with a bunch of like pro-gun rights ads all over their buses and things like that. So you generally, as a policy, cities want to avoid things that are potentially offensive, things that are really going to I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. I don't necessarily mean, I guess things that are really, really controversial, things that are likely to inspire anger or strong emotions while people are stuck on a bus together for 45 minutes or longer, right? So that's sort of the risk.
Butch, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I thank you, Sherry, and thank you for the memo that you did, Sherry, as well. It worked. It was very informative. It covered pretty much. We had this conversation back in 2018 as well, and it's exactly what the challenge is for us. That's why we have looked at systems across the country, looked at different policies and things like that. And the commercial advertising aspect is where we're trying to keep it in there. I know, there's a lot of examples you can use out there on that, but like Sherry said, once you open that door, then we have to let everybody from any viewpoint advertise whatever they want. I'll give you an example that we've already restricted. When Bill was the attorney, we had a request from Prince Avenue Baptist Church, wanted to advertise, come to high school and go to high school at Prince Avenue Baptist Church High School. And Bill basically reviewed it and said no, because if we do that, someone could say we're endorsing Christianity, whether you're pro or con, whatever. But he said then it could be perceived that the Athens-Clarke County government and or the transit system are endorsing that. And so we denied that ad. There was some argument, went over it back and forth with a proposed advertiser. But once they saw our point, and of course our attorney's comments on it, they said no, they wouldn't do it. And so, sorry, we didn't allow the ad. So it's just a very slippery slope when you get in there for the different things, because we don't want to represent the local government or the transit system in any one particular view. We want to be very neutral. That's why it's a commercial advertising, and we're very I'm tough with that. I mean, I see when these, sometimes if our vendor that we're using now, and of course Houck Advertising recently was rewarded again, they know the policy, they know how we're going to interpret the policy. And on occasion, I will get the question, hey, what about this? Or, hey, what about that? And I'll look at it and say, yeah, yes or no. And it may work for the policy. It may not work for the policy. But, we tend to deny them if we think there's going to be any controversy at all.
So, Sherry, I think, and definitely the memo was really helpful to go through all of that. And I guess my question would be, just looking at and I know some of this might just be that different interpretation, or also a less litigious community. But is there any possible room for us just to increase or allow more content than what we have now? Do you see any room for us to be able to expand out? And the reason I just asked is I was riding the bus today, and it's just there's a lot of unused advertising spots, and I think a lot of this is why. But I'm just trying to figure out if there is any ways or rooms that we could increase the amount of content we could bring in, just to try to increase some of the advertising revenue.
Like Butch said, we worked on this in 2018 really extensively, and I will say we pulled models, really good ones from other states to come up with this one. I'm definitely not opposed to trying to pull some others to see if we can find something that's worked someplace else, or like some ideas. But I really think the issue is probably more about like COVID and questions of like whether the bus is a good advertising format for some of our local businesses, as opposed to content. I think it'd be very hard to expand the policy's offerings in terms of content without running afoul. And maybe one thing I have not explained terribly well is that the problem is that when you stay in that limited public forum, the standard of not evidence, but the standard that the courts are going to evaluate you by is sort of like the rational basis test. It's not exactly, but it's basically as long as you have a legitimate reason for saying no to this piece of advertising, and you're not like saying, oh no, because we don't like you, then you can do it. But once we start allowing any of this stuff, we go straight to strict scrutiny, and that is almost impossible to overcome unless, like I said, it's obscene. So even though, like the example with the Planned Parenthood case, that was a situation where they were posting patently false information about abortions and the threat to women, but there's nothing the government can do about it because they've already opened that door by using posting family planning ads. So it's really dangerous once you get into that to try to restrict things. Butch, do you have any ideas? Is there anything you can think of that you want to explore?
I think, we went with, we allowed restaurants and bars and things like that. We had a restriction on that, and we did open that one up the last time we did this. Commissioner Denson, I would ask if maybe between now and maybe the next time we talk about this, if or the rest of the committee as well, maybe give us some ideas of the type of content you're talking about, those kind of ideas. I mean, we can clearly do products and things like that. One of the ones I can tell you another one that we turned down, which I kind of felt bad about, was Golden Pantry. We turned down Golden Pantry because they do consolidated advertising. They'll do milk, bread, eggs, Coors Light, and cigarettes. And we said, sorry, can't do that because it has these other things in it. And, so if you take these out, but the way they bundle their advertising, everybody pays, and that's kind of how it works. Another quick comment on the ads that are currently on the buses. That is very truly COVID related type stuff that's going on with the downturn in the economy. Some of the stuff that I sent you guys back in September, I believe it was, had some information on there about how hard it is for businesses to run transit advertising, not only locally, but across the nation right now. It's a really tough gig. And a lot of companies can't put out that $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $600,000, $800,000 a month for advertising when they're worrying about making payroll or whether they're going to be shut down next week. Because, we do the 3, 6, 12, and 24-month type contracts with those folks. So that's the challenge with the advertising right now. So as far as the sales for things that are out there and available to sell products and services right now, that's the challenge we have with that. But if you guys, if you think about some content, I know Commissioner Link and I had a conversation several years ago about doing political ads on the side of the buses, and that was an issue that our commission at the time decided they didn't want to do. So if you say item A, B, C, D, or content A, B, C, or D, then that might give Sherry and I an opportunity to research those more and maybe find some examples from around the country of what has been allowed and what has not been allowed, or how those have affected those communities.
I mean, my personal feeling, because, as Josh or Sherry or Butch or somebody said, we did talk about this a couple of years ago. I mean, I think this is Pandora's box, and there might be things that we personally think are, or entities and causes that we personally think are great, Planned Parenthood. But as Sherry said, the moment you allow them, you've got to allow NARAL and anti-abortion groups rather. So the moment you have political advertising, then you might get an ad from the American Nazi Party, and I just don't think I just don't think it's worth the grief, frankly. So for those reasons, I think I think where our policy is at the moment, is we have a justifiable reason for turning down things that don't match our community standards. But I just don't think the few thousand extra dollars that we would get, I just don't think it's worth the grief.
Commissioner, can I add something?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we do want to think about as well is our advertising program. We are a very small city when it comes to that type of stuff. We're operating 32 buses and 16 buses in peak, sometimes 18 right now because of what's going on with COVID. The most we have is 24 buses on the street at a time. We also have the revolving issue of the summer/UGA break schedule, where we operate more buses than what we operate or operate fewer buses than what we operate from the August timeframe through the first part of May. That's always a challenge with advertisers as well. And we're really, we've made between $60,000 and $75,000 a year on this. Like you're saying, if we wound up in a situation where we had to go to litigation over something like this, all the money we've made in that in the last couple of years is probably going to go away real quick over perhaps one ad. So we might want to think about that.
Patrick, do you have anything you want to add?
No, the memo pretty much summed it up, and I agree. We don't want to open up that box, and Boots pretty much summed it up as well. We want to continue to get ad revenue. Don't want to piss off good people, so I'm fine.
I mean, is this something that the committee wants to do some more research on, or do we want to pass it out with saying, yeah, we want to have a higher proportion of our buses have adverts, but that in terms of the content, we want to leave that policy pretty much as is?
I do remember having this conversation in 2018, and I remember we pretty much came to the same place. If we did say start allowing political ads, we could end up with a mega bus, a full wrap. It is a Pandora's box. And I don't think there's. I think that I don't think there's anything we can go to move it forward.
I guess the only thing that I would add or ask a question about, just going to that Golden Pantry kind of example, which I think obviously is something that's getting caught up here that we didn't intend it to. If the language could be, I looked at it now even, and I think it says products or services related primarily to the sale or consumption of alcohol. As I guess I would hope that the Golden Pantry could get through because of the word primarily, but I don't know. But if there was a way that we could just open it up a little bit so that if there was, you had to say a general retailer like that, who wanted to put something, I don't know. I guess that'd be the only thing that I would be interested in outside of just going ahead and removing limitations on the percentage of buses that we're allowing for advertising.
Can I clarify something there, Commissioner?
Sure.
That Golden Pantry ad is what helped us get the provision of alcohol in 2018. That was prior to 2018 changes. So if they came back to us today, they would be able to do so. And another comment I'm hearing, and I think we have a little confusion on, the CDO that we did to allow the contract to move forward for 2 years did allow for the number of buses to be wrapped to be up to 50%. So I think we're past that one. I think that's already been approved by the Mayor and Commission based upon that CDO we did in September. I think it was September. I'm sorry. Maybe it was 1st of October we did it. It's been a long couple of months. Actually, it's been a long year. But anyway, I think we're good with that one. One thing that I would not like to see that go any higher than that, because if we go more than 50% on our buses, the folks that buy or can afford the $300 a month side wrap or the $150 a month back tail wrap that's on the rear of the bus or whatever, we don't want to put those smaller businesses out of the out of the competition, out of the running. They would, if we did 100% full wraps, those things cost $3,000 a month, and the local government gets $1,500 of that after production and installation. So a lot of companies can't afford $3,000 a month for advertising. And, if we have, I know there's a young lady, I'm sorry, I can't think of her name, but she runs a cleaning supply service. She's got 2 or 3 ads on the back of our buses. She probably can't afford that kind of money, but she can afford $150 a month per bus. And so I wouldn't want to go any higher than the 50% on full wraps. And if we can sell them, great. Hopefully the economy will come back and after the first of the year, and we'll start selling more ads.
And we're at 50% right now. Is that what you said, Bush?
That's correct. That was outlined in the CDO that was submitted by Commissioner Denson when you guys approved the 2-year extension to the contract and said for us to come back and look at this.
Okay. Well, in that case, since we're there, and I personally am not interested in going beyond commercial speech, and for the purposes of moving this along, I'm going to make a motion that we pass this item out with no action.
I'll second it.
Is there any further discussion?
No.
Okay. Then in that case, if everybody who's in approval would say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay. Thank you all. I think it's been a useful discussion. And I think it's good to have these discussions periodically. But as I say, especially what Butch said in terms of, if we get sued, we're going to lose whatever revenue we got plus some, I think. So I think it's better to be safe than sorry on this kind of stuff. Okay, so we've only got a few minutes left.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Keep
Bush.
this
Thanks, Bud.
to an hour. So, Josh, we did the third item was to talk a little bit about our stormwater, and maybe we could get the 50,000 foot view of what we're trying to address, some issues, and then maybe at our next meeting we can have this as the first item and drill down into that.
Definitely. We appreciate y'all's feedback on the last item and staff's help on that. And Attorney Hines, thank you so much for your work on it. Before I hand it off to Stephen, I just wanted to thank our TPW team and our fire team for all the work they did this morning. By the time people woke up, so many of our trees were cleaned up, and they continue to clean this morning. I just got to say, I know Kevin Gentry's on the call. We just appreciate y'all's work and appreciate what you did this morning to make everybody's travel safe and keep people safe. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Stephen for the high view on this, and he's got some good ideas on where we can go from here.
Great. Thank you, Josh. And maybe it's more of a question of which direction you want us to take this for our next conversation with this. So tonight, what the original plan was having more of an in-depth talk about the public versus private drainage improvements and the future of our DIA program. And that's really a smaller piece of the overall level of service stormwater discussion. So we're still happy to have that as the conversation next time around. But also after Blaine's email today about the creation of a citizen stormwater advisory committee, we could also spend that time talking about what that type of committee might look like, as well as, how that would have a direct effect on level of service and DIA. So really maybe just getting your feedback on which way you'd like us to take it.
Committee, Melissa?
Yeah. When I saw this item on the agenda and saw Blaine's memo, that's what I thought. I was like, why are we discussing this in GovOps if we're going to create a committee that would have probably some qualified professionals on it to discuss it? I'd be willing to move that we move this item to that committee. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
Go ahead, Tim.
I guess the only thing I was going to say is just because maybe just have our recommendation be that committee go ahead and be created. I don't just to have it kind of fast tracked and guarantee that it's actually going to happen, because right now it's still a little bit in the ether. But yeah, I agree. I think that that seems like that needs to be the next step.
One question I would have to that, Commissioner Denson, is there any feedback on the timeline that was in the email? I know it was sent today, but that might be one thing as y'all look, that you could give feedback on.
Yeah, and I can screen share that if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it.
Whilst they're doing that, I mean, I don't have a problem with that. I do think, though, when this committee is formed, so before I was on the commission back in 2003, I think it was, I was on the original citizens committee that came up with the utility, and so I do have some familiarity with this. I mean, I think it's always good to revisit things, but I think when we're doing the education for this, I think two things really need to be made very, very clear. The first is that we have to have some kind of stormwater utility under the Federal Clean Water Act. So getting rid of it is not an option. That's number one. The second then becomes, how do you pay for it? And the big discussion we had back in 2003 is there's really only two ways to pay for it: property taxes or a utility. And if we do it as a utility, then all of the tax exempt property in the county, like all of the federal buildings, the university, school district, all others, pay the utility. If we do it out of property taxes, you have about 40% of the county that will never pay a penny towards stormwater management, which of course then means the other 60% are picking up the tab for that. So I don't have a problem with, our recommendation being, yes, let's go ahead and suggest a committee be formed. But I would really be pretty adamant that those two items are made abundantly clear to whoever sits on this committee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to back that up, I mean, I would. I'm trying to look through, on Blaine's memo, and some of this does seem like it would be possibly back on the table. I really kind of fear it would be a bit of a step backwards if we stepped away from the utility structure, which we've already had in place, and which I think definitely could be improved upon. And when we talk about the fee structures and the possible rebates and discounts that we've talked about in the past, I'm on board with that. But I would, even if we were to switch the funding source, I feel like that would just be us kind of rebuilding a program that I'm not as interested in us rebuilding as much as us revisiting and just finding improvements in. So yeah, maybe if we came up with a more specific scope that we recommend the committee to do, that would be a good idea.
Patrick, you haven't spoken.
Yeah, I got the email late, right before the meeting started, so I'm still digesting it because I really did want to talk about the zone of influence, and maybe putting, Commissioner Link and Hamby had mentioned the PUD and doing monthly. Certain things that we can just fast track now or just begin the conversation. I like committees, but with that, all the things that's going on, I think just for me, this is one of those issues that at least in my lifetime that I like to get tackled. So I'm just still mulling it over.
Well, I'm cognizant of the fact that we're a little bit over time now. Do we want to kind of mull over the email that we got this afternoon and think about narrowing down what we might want a committee to look like? As I said, that to me, there are two lines that I do not think should be crossed. But I also agree with Tim that, there's some room for some tweaking within those broad parameters. So do we maybe want to think for our next meeting about how we might want to narrow down what we're requesting any kind of citizen committee to look at, rather than just saying, here, look at it all? I guess what I'm saying is I would probably prefer to narrow it down a little bit to some of the things that we know, maybe need some tweaking. Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think the stormwater utility needs to be rebuilt or reconsidered. I've thought about it long and hard, and I feel like it is the most rational approach to dealing with that federally mandated issue. And yeah, I haven't had a whole lot of time to digest that memo. So I do agree that maybe we take a good look at the memo, all the things that Blaine outlined. I'm, looking at the agenda item, I'm not really quite sure what was being asked of this committee in the first place. And, I just presume it overlaps completely with this committee that Blaine is proposing. Does anybody want to offer me some clarity on that, on what specifically this public-private agreement issue that we're supposed to be discussing is? Just a quick,
Yes, I can. So Commissioner Hamby and I, we have some issues with residents who feel that the water that's drained from a pipe from the street that goes into a personal property, county should pay for. But there's the contract agreement is that the county pays for, and please, Mr. Stevenson, correct me, the county pays for the equipment, pays for the labor, the resident pays for the equipment, and there's certain issues where it's a gray area.
Mm-hmm.
Certain incidents where it's gray area.
So this is basically what was covered in our work session.
Yes.
Okay. Which I do believe completely overlaps with what Blaine presented. I really, I do feel like, a broader committee that focuses specifically on stormwater issues could include that as part of their focus rather than this committee. And because, stormwater, there is some technical expertise out there that I think could have some voice in, a broader and more detailed discussion of stormwater.
So the specific information that I got from the mayor, because I said, what exactly do you want us to look at? What's the issue we're trying to solve? And he said it's the specifics of the private property impact support program. Historically, we have funded staff labor if the impacted neighborhood or property owner would fund the materials. Staff in the attorney's office need some direction. I think the legal viability of the labor might have been called into question. So I think that's kind of what we're supposed to be looking at, which I think gels with what Patrick just said. But there is also the broader issue, which I think is part of this conversation about what to do when people who should be maintaining easements on their private property, and that causes problems for people downstream. What happens when they're not doing that? And, we could sort of, as we've done for the last 20 years, say, well, you should do this, which obviously hasn't been very successful, or we can come up with a way to maybe, do it on their behalf. And then the question becomes, do we charge them for it? Or does that simply become part of the community cost of making sure that we handle stormwater as a community? So to me, those are the two kind of big things that I think we should be looking at. Sherry.
Thank you. And I just wanted to chime in because it never fails that the gratuities clause rears its ugly head. But I think that's the main thing legally to be thinking about, which is that, we can't just provide things to citizens that they're responsible for maintaining for free. If we can articulate a value to us, there may be a way to do that. And I know we've done that with certain instances, but that's the big thing to be trying to navigate.
And I think the value is that there's a community value to collectively managing stormwater. So, but that to me, I'm not the lawyer, so I don't have all of the fancy words to explain how to make that argument. But on a basic level, that's what we're talking about.
Right.
What is more important? Is it the community value of managing our stormwater that is generated versus trying to get private property owners who we know should be doing this but are not?
Sure. And I think that it sort of reminds me of the septic tank conversation as well, in the sense that there could be a lot of value to us saying we're going to come in and fix these things, but at some point, do we have to step back and say the value to that? The value to the community is certainly there, but does it fall within one of those legal exceptions to the gratuities clause that you've all read so much about, or is it really just helping out a homeowner who already had a legal responsibility to take care of these things? Sort of like there's a great gratuities clause, well, not great, but there's a gratuities clause case on a government fixing a parking lot for a church, paving it, and that was 100% not allowed, even though it was a church, let alone just a private individual. So I think what we've done before in the cases when we could say, that cost sharing thing allowed us to say to massage that issue because they're getting a benefit, but we're getting a benefit. I think it's really concerning to just go out and do it for them free. But maybe there's some sort of like we were talking about with the septic tank, maybe there's some sort of voluntary incentives or things like that we could set up to try to address some of this.
I mean, I think, as I say, I'm not the attorney, but I mean, I think the difference for me is just kind of the common sense approach is that the church parking lot clearly is a benefit for the church. Managing stormwater collectively it's all part of one hydrological system. And so, what happens on property owner A's property affects what happens not only on their neighbors, but everybody else downstream. And so, to me, that's the difference. Now, whether there's that can be articulated in terms of fancy legalese, that's a different question. But I mean, at a very common sense perspective, that to me seems to be really what we're getting at is what is the community benefit of us as a community dealing with this when you have recalcitrant private property owners who won't. Okay, Melissa, quickly, and then Tim and Patrick, if you want to say anything, and then I think we need to wrap up. And Melissa, you're on mute.
I just want to suggest that we ask staff to, write out a memo expounding upon the issue that we're looking at. So, we at least have that on paper. So if we're going to consider it next month and consider whether we'll pursue it or ask that it goes to committee.
Okay. Can you do that, Josh? Okay. Tim?
Thanks, Andy. I say part of that, I guess we've already gotten a little bit from Todd's presentation, at the work session that kind of really went into this. But I said, I think for the most part, Blaine's memo hits, I think, the priorities that if we're going to have this committee look at most of those. But there was a few specifics that I was just going to throw out there that might be helpful for staff that I would like to see focused on. Which, of course, we're already talking about the level of service and the zone of influence, as Patrick brought up. I think specifically utility rate structures, so that we could actually, if we are to go for this larger level of service, that we'd have to revisit to actually pay for it. I would like us to be looking into that schedule of rebates based on mitigation efforts, which I know was presented at one time too, that we just haven't really seen come forward since then. So again, we could actually have people just taking their own, doing their own work to actually try to mitigate the stormwater here. And then the last part, which I don't think has been focused on enough, I don't see in here at all, and which we've referenced here, is I think we need to have some recommendations on the utilities' outward-facing parts so that we can fix the public perception of stormwater, but also create a better understanding of that community responsibility that I don't think is very well understood. And I think a lot of that responsibility falls on us for our communication efforts. And I think that would also help us get rid of what we see sometimes as the demonization of stormwater, which I think a lot of times is based on people not understanding the utility and how it is a community shared responsibility. But I think we really need to prioritize that so that people react to this in a more responsible manner and see that they do have a role in this and that this role is not just falling on the county government. And then the last thing is us looking at planning and zoning policies also. so that we don't get stuck in these situations as much as we do. I mean, the biggest stormwater situation I've had in my district so far was a subdivision that was created, obviously, just in a kind of poorly managed stormwater kind of structure. And then we had homeowners buy houses there and realize 6-8 months after they bought the house that they have a pond in their backyard whenever it rains. And that these things are not being communicated. I think that sometimes we just don't have maybe high enough standards, or again, maybe that understanding level going to developers and then also going to property owners. And those are like big things, but I feel like that maybe that's some stuff that we could have this committee focus on too.
Yep. Pretty much Commissioner Denson and Link summed it up.
Oh, sorry. All right, Josh, do you have enough to go on for the time being?
We sure do. We appreciate the feedback, y'all. This has been a very helpful conversation.
Okay. So one thing I would request from the attorney's office, if you could maybe, Sherry, start to pull together some materials on kind of how community benefit intersects with the gratuities clause, that I think that would be helpful, because there's no point in us kind of coming up with all of these grandiose schemes if the first response is, well, that's a constitutional violation. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be really helpful.
Sure, absolutely.
All right, super. Okay, we're a little bit over time, so I am going to call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Everybody opposed? All right, thanks. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. I thought it was a productive meeting.
Thank you all.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.